Well, welcome to Denny Talks. I'm so excited to have our next guest on our podcast today, and her name is Melody Munch. So, welcome to the podcast, my dear.
Yay! Thanks for having me, Lauren.
Yes. Well, I want to start off by saying that we are pretty close in proximity. So, you are in the Oklahoma area, as same as I am. So, I would just love to know a little bit about your story and what you did initially to get started for selling and creating resources for teachers.
Yeah, so I live in the Tulsa area, so yeah, it's not very far from Lauren. And I've taught second grade for 8 years and just kind of naturally along that teaching journey was told about teacher Instagram and thought that was just so cool. I got a lot of ideas from that platform. And so then I naturally was like, I want to share ideas with people too. And so as I shared there, just lots of ideas and things I was working on, people kind of started asking if I could make different things I shared into digital resources that they could use too. And so I had a TPT that was like all of 2 listings, it had like one meet the teacher template I made, and it was just, not something I was pursuing. But as people kept asking and I kept listing, it just grew little by little, very organically until it was like, okay, this is like becoming something I'm passionate about, and making new things was something I was passionate about. So around my 7th year of teaching, there was kind of a shift where I was spending every spare moment outside of class working on things for the business and working on listing things. And so I just got really time poor and decided like, there's some wisdom in slowing down, and there was a great season of doing both things and I loved that, but I knew it wasn't long-term sustainable. So we were able to make the choice that we were just going to do the business last year, and so that's what I'm also doing this year since my husband and I are expecting our first baby due in December. So we decided that will make the most sense for this year, and then we'll keep reevaluating yearly because I still love the classroom. I just needed to have a different capacity for a little while.
Welcome to Denny Talks, a guiding conversation to living life to the fullest. Join us for inspiring discussions on entrepreneurship, small business tips, and seizing the opportunities. Subscribe now for concise, motivating episodes that encourage you to chase your dreams, where we believe that life, dreams, and opportunities collide. Right. And that's definitely okay. And I think that's why I love doing this podcast interviews, is being able to talk to these entrepreneurs where you go down one rabbit hole or one career path, and it's okay to adjust and change just depending on the life avenue that you guys are currently in. And so you might go back into teaching in a
Yes.
little while. And that's what I did too, is I was teaching and then I went forward with physical product business, and then realized like, gosh, my heart is still so much in teaching. And when there's
Mm,
an opportunity, I'm now going back into the classroom. So this is my second year that I'm getting ready to get started, and I feel like a brand new teacher. So I love
good.
that you are sharing so many of like these back to school different ideas. And even though I'm at a different level of age group, there's so many back to school tips and tricks that you can share that is relatable for different ages. So I like that you are using Instagram to share that, because I think that is definitely a cool tool for everybody to use. So you
Yeah.
shared a little bit about your challenges that you have come across when it comes to your time. So can you tell me a little bit more about the challenges that you faced when you first started out and kind of how you overcame them?
Sure. So, because I was really considering like the business was definitely in a hobby mode for a while. I don't know if it was like that for you with your physical signs at first, but it was definitely like, oh, this is neat. People bought something on occasion, but I didn't switch to the business mindset probably until I was a good at least 2 years in. So for me, that's kind of when the business started, is like when I made that shift of like, oh, this could really be something, like this could take over my teaching income. I hadn't really thought that would be in the cards for me
Right.
until it did happen. And then I was like, wait a minute, like I need to be thinking about this differently and taking it a bit more seriously, being more strategic and things like that. So there were a lot of layers in my business that people who start a business might do from the beginning that I hadn't done because I was just thinking of it as a hobby.
Mhm.
And there's pros and cons to both of those things. When it's just a hobby, there's less pressure, there's less stress. But then when you decide to transition that hobby into a business, you have a bit longer of a to-do list than if you were kind of expecting that from the beginning. So that was probably one of the biggest hurdles for me was like, okay, well, now I need an email list, and okay, now I need a blog storefront, and eventually I wanted to add on YouTube, and I don't think you can do everything at the same time. So gradually adding those things in was how it worked for me, but just making that kind of business owner hat shift was hard for me because it had always just been this fun little hobby, but there are things to consider when you're selling items like copyright that I had to make sure I was checking my resources more carefully for, or how I include clip art and all of those things that I just was not really thinking hard about because it was not a business to me until later. That kind of created more work after I switched that mindset. Cause then I was like, oh, wait, I really need to like dot all the I's and cross all the T's here if I'm gonna do this.
Right. Yes. And that, like you said, and that once you do that forefront thinking, then the rest of it will come so much easier when you kind of do that. So that backpedaling a little bit, I'm sure
Yes.
is hard to do. So can you tell me a little bit about what kind of resources that you currently create and how people use them in their classrooms?
Yeah, so most of my resources fit the first through third grade spot since second grade was always my sweet spot. So when I'm creating, I kind of keep those grade levels most in mind. But a lot of my resources apply to all teachers, like classroom slide templates that I make on Google. That was something that was just an essential way I planned my lessons. So I started sharing about that. And naturally, people started asking if I could make my templates available. So I make a lot of that. I make different pre-made units. I love to have slides guiding me through a unit and printable resources so that it's kind of all in one. So when I make a unit, like I've been making morning meeting units or life skill units, there are slides that guide the teachers through each day, and then there are printables that go along with it so that they really have everything they need and they're not having to make anything else for teaching it to their class.
Yeah.
So lots of things like that, things that boost engagement, and kind of my heart is in the memory making activities. So anything that can create a strong, positive school memory, those are my favorite things to make because that's what I want my students to walk away with is those really fun learning memories from our year together. So those are the things like classroom transformations and special ways to recognize students. Those are things that really excite my heart.
Right. And those definitely do make things memorable in the classroom. Another one of your items that really stand out to me is your classroom songs.
Ah, yes. That kind of goes with my memory makers for me because students will like remember those for years, which is so special. And that's often something they would go home and like show their families. So for reference, we had songs that we would start the day with that were community building. I'd pick a popular song and rewrite the words to like emphasize our classroom values, and we'd start the day with it, and it just really got everyone in a good mood and off to the right foot and really united us together. And then I started making some for different learning concepts as well, so we'd sprinkle some in if they were fitting throughout the day. And that always was so fun when parents would be like, I know the song just as well as my student because they can't stop singing it at home. And just that's something that can stick with you for a long time when you memorize a song. So I love getting to do those as well.
Yes, and you have made so many different resources available for so many teachers to be able to translate that same exact feeling that I'm sure they get from the classroom as well. So can you tell me a little bit about for teachers who maybe are interested in getting started in creating their own resources, what are some of the very first steps that now that you know whether they want it to be a hobby or turn it into a business, what are some generic things that we need to know?
Yes, so definitely purchasing rights to fonts and clip art is something that I feel like I didn't take too long to learn that, but there was definitely a moment where I was like, what? I have to purchase a right to this font? Like, I thought it was a free font, but oftentimes fonts are created for personal use. So then if they become sold, a part of a paid product for commercial use, you need to have a license for that, which usually they're very inexpensive. A lot of the teacher pay teacher authors offer a license for $5 a font or something very affordable. So it's not like it's a huge expense. But you do have to think about that. So you want to make sure you're doing things by the book. And then things like clip art, when you purchase that, there are different rules different clip art artists have. So something I didn't learn about till more recently was different rules on flattening clip art. I was new to hearing about that, but basically when you create an editable product, some clip artists will want you to make sure that their clip art is locked onto that page so that somebody that did not purchase their clip art cannot access it or copy it and move it. They want it to be flattened so that it's not movable on the page. So there are different ways you can flatten clip art. There's a wonderful program by a company called Bearwood Labs that will do it for you and makes it very simple, and it's not very expensive. So if you're getting serious, I would purchase that for sure. It integrates with PowerPoint. And that's where I create most of my resources. It's really simple in PowerPoint. So those were a couple things that I was late to the game on that I'm like, man, why didn't I know that? Or I have some really old products, Lauren, that I made in Microsoft Word. And I'm like, what was I doing? That is not a design program. How did I try to make anything in there? And I'm sure most people know that that's not a super user-friendly creative thing to use now, but I just didn't know any other programs at the time. So I still go back and find old things sometimes that I have to update and put into PowerPoint because I'm like, oh my goodness, I made that in Word. How did I do that?
And it was, yeah, if anybody's ever made anything in Word, you realize like how hard it is to like format something or move like a picture
Yes,
in that same exact spot. So I did the same exact thing. And
yes.
when you like look back at some of those beginning resources, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe I was okay with like putting that out on the world. But I also want to say that too, is that I'm glad that we both did, because where would we be without those beginning steps?
Right. Totally normal to look back and cringe at some different things you made. I've definitely deactivated some older products that I'm not like, oh, I don't want someone to buy that. And then I was at the Teachers Pay Teachers conference recently, and they gave a fun example. They were like, if something sells and you cringe inwardly because you don't feel proud of that resource, that is a good sign to go in and update it. And I was like, oh, that's so true. There's rare occasions where I'll see something old sell and I'm like, oh, I need to go update that. So I try to be diligent about that, or at least deactivating something if it's getting too rough.
Yes, exactly. So as a Teachers Pay Teachers author, you have given us so many different ideas of how to kind of get started. For the designing part of things, what are your top, you said PowerPoint, but you also mentioned Google Slides. So which product do you prefer to start to design in if you're going to use both?
I love PowerPoint because of all the font options.
Okay.
So the one downfall of Google, which maybe one day, my fingers have been crossed for a long time.
I think
Maybe one day they'll change it. But as of now, Google has a host of fonts you can use, and you can't install your own fonts. So all those cutesy fonts that you might want to use are not able to be integrated into Google unless they're pasted as an image. So that would mean teachers can't edit the wording as they would want. So I prefer, especially if I'm making something that is supposed to be editable, I prefer PowerPoint because I like the way it can look with the different fonts and options better. But I do know there are a lot of schools that don't offer Microsoft subscriptions anymore. So if you're one of those teachers, then you can just use the Google fonts that you have and create in Google. When I do create something in Google, I typically lean more to having just their fonts so that teachers can fine tune the resource
Mhm.
rather than using lots of pasted images, just because I found teachers are using the resource in all different ways, and most of them would prefer to have full access to customize it rather than for it to be perfectly cute if they're using Google. So that's kind of what I found to be my go-tos. And then when I'm buying clip art or if I'm buying backgrounds that I want to use in products, usually Etsy and Teachers Pay Teachers are my go-to spots where I purchase those.
Mhm. Yeah, those are the top two ones I would recommend as well. So thank you for sharing a lot of that. That advice is so helpful. When you're now going back and re-updating a lot of your products, do you recommend for teachers to kind of have like a seamless look? Like you've created like this brand online. So you are Mrs. Munch's Munchkins. So you have created something that's really iconic. So how would you recommend for advice for teachers who are wanting to do the same thing? Getting started just on Instagram teacher, I want to say teacher TV, but it's like, teacher talk.
Yes. Well, thank you, first of all. And I think that, yeah, if you're just getting started, you can kind of feel it out. But once you know what your name is or what you want your colors to be, it is really nice to, for me, it was nice to outsource having like a logo created. And I had someone outsource like my cover pages pretty recently. I updated those. So I have to go back and redo the covers or add the covers that are new into some of my older resources. But yeah, I kind of stuck to the same color palette once I found some colors that I consistently was using and liked. And Madison Mann is the name of one of the virtual assistants I've used. She does graphic design work and she made all of my cover pages. She also made a landing page for my Instagram bio that is in the same brand colors and fonts, and everything looks really uniform. So I loved outsourcing that because it's something you can spend your time on. And for me, it's even something I kind of like doing, but I knew that with my own perspective, I would spend just so much longer on a project like that than necessary when I really have more important products to be making or things to be getting out. So I decided to outsource that. And it's not like it's super expensive either. You can find people that do very affordable work and make it a part of your business expense budget for the year. And I found that to be really worth it because it was just one less thing to worry about. And then it was also someone with a little bit more professional eye that's seen more teachers and helped more teachers designing for me. So I found that to really relieve some stress about having to make all those branding decisions. And then let me tell you the other gal's name. I know it's Molly, but I'm forgetting her last name. And she designed my logo. And she also helped me.
Oh, golly, Miss Molly.
Yes, golly, Miss Molly, thank you. Yeah, she designed my logo and she helped me design my store banner that's on my Teacher Pay Teacher store. So they all look like they could be designed by the same person because I gave my second gal all the tools from my logo and she just went with that palette and those fonts. But yes, outsourcing some of that if you are, especially if you're like, that's not my wheelhouse, I think that can be really helpful.
Yes. Well, and people just really like seeing things uniform. And so once
Yeah.
you're establishing yourself as a creator, it is really helpful that you can just those things are already created for you as a creator that you can just go back, plug in the new items, and you're done and ready to move on. So once you kind of have those foundational skills, it's definitely helpful for that. So now, as we are kind of wrapping up, do you have any specific advice or suggestions that you would like to share with our audience?
Oh, well, if they are wanting to get started and most teachers ask me like I just don't know where to start if they're wanting to start listing resources, I always say like just look at what you've made for your classroom or what does your classroom need. I always found creating from that place first was the best experience, and then being in the classroom, being able to test resources before I listed them was so valuable. I could work through any kinks or any misspellings or any confusion. And that just really helped make my resources more robust because once I could see where those hiccups were as I was testing them in my own class, I could go in with that insight to the next resource and start ahead of where I was the last time. So always test things out yourself and print off your own copies before you list it and really just make sure that it's going to be a seamless experience for whoever else purchases what you've designed so that you can be really proud of it and feel confident that teachers are going to love it.
That's like really good, great advice. I can't tell you how many times I put something else out there and there's been a typo and you're like, ah, it's already.
Ah, I know it's so hard to catch them all sometimes.
You got it. So then lastly is what kind of advice do you have for teachers or lasting words that you'd like to share with just any teacher who is getting ready to go back to school? And what do you want us to know from an educator on the outside now?
Oh, yeah. Well, I just feel like teaching is such an impactful role that we'll never fully know how deep those things that you've said or things that you've done for your students, that loving just action of showing up every day and being there for them, being a safe environment. We never fully know how that impacts a child's life. But just remember that you are changing lives, even if you can't see that change immediately, that it's sowing roots, it's sowing seeds that will continue to flourish. And so everything that you do matters, and how you show up every day and how you set the energy for your room really matters. And so just take heart that even though there are hard moments and hard days, that everything you're doing is so valuable and you are being such a light into every student that walks into your room, and they're so lucky to have you. So just don't ever forget how much of an impact you're making, even if you can't see it right away.
Right. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think that's important for all of us to know as we're going into the start of the back to school and just really setting our hearts ready for incoming students who are coming
Mhm.
in on that. So I appreciate that perspective. And sometimes I think that teachers in the education field do get maybe a bad rep, or they just are always scrutinized a little bit about our profession. And so I think it's important for all of us to rally together and remember, why are we in this, and the impact that it does have. It ultimately just comes down to who's in your classroom that matters. So I appreciate that.
Mhm. Yes, of course.
So where can people find you and your resources, Melody?
Yes, so Mrs. Munch's Munchkins for everything. That's where I'm at on Instagram, TikTok. That's my website as well, and the name of my store.
Yes, so easy to find you on Instagram, and Teachers Pay Teachers is going to be where you're going to get those resources. So I appreciate your time here today, and congratulations on all of the new and all of the different avenues that you are going on in your life as you're stepping away from the classroom and welcoming in a new bundle of joy in December. So I appreciate
Thank
your time today, Melody.
Oh, you're so welcome.